welcome to this week's CybHER conversation brought to you by Peraton. My name is Audrey Murphy, and on behalf of Peraton, we are proud to partner with CybHER to bring you these weekly conversations. For those of you who are joining for the first time, CybHER is a program out of Dakota State University in Madison, South Dakota that works to motivate, empower, and educate young women in cybersecurity. Just as a reminder, if at any point during the program you have a question, you can use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to ask the question. I'm very honored to introduce today's speaker, Lisa Thie. Lisa is the lead for the Data for Good practice at Launch Consulting Group, where she is harnessing groundbreaking technology to spearhead high-impact initiatives that have a social impact. She connects mission-based companies with the best resources, advisors, and partners to scale rapidly in a responsible way. Lisa has collaborated with companies and nonprofits like Intel, Google, Microsoft, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Lisa, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. So I've been asked to give you guys a 10-minute wash and wax about my career journey, and then we're going to open it up for questions because I think that's where the interesting parts come in. But as by way of introduction, my name is Lisa Thie. I studied engineering at the University of Michigan and came into a large tech company early in my career. At that time, we were forecasting the cellular market. We were trying to decide whether phones would have color displays and cameras. Little did we know that we would have the trends of social and mobile and cloud that have evolved over time. So as I moved through my career journey, I went from being in the strategic supply chain planning space all the way through into IT management, where I had the opportunity to visit 36 countries before the age of 30. I found that incredibly invigorating to be able to get almost a PhD in the world. The best part about traveling for work that way in a technical field was that we often had people that were locals in each of the places that I went to. So I got to see how people really lived, not just the sanitized tourist versions of these cities. And people were really gracious with their time and opening up their home and their customs and seeing things. During that journey, I did have some experiences that were a little bit more problematic and things that I just hadn't been exposed to growing up in a middle-class family in the Midwest. And that was the human trafficking of children. When I would travel in the business hotels, because I was in my early 20s still, I was often mistaken for a flight attendant. And so people that were traveling for business in these high-end places were often not seeing me as somebody that could bear witness to some poor behavior or had a position of power to talk about it. And one of those trips I was in Malaysia, and I'll never forget the time that it was a Tuesday night. We were out socializing at a bar, and I saw a young girl dressed up like the character from Pretty Woman for sale in a bar. And when I say young, I don't mean 15, 16, 17. I mean 7. There's some things you can't unknow. After that experience, I committed to myself that when I got to a position of power in my career, that I would focus back on making the invisible visible and bringing power to those voices. So as I made it to director level in a large tech company many years later after I was married with children, I really started to look at technical innovations that could bring leading edge technologies to bear for vulnerable populations like women and children globally. In that work, I was able to find some technologies that Intel was using to improve outcomes for patients that were dealing with cancer diagnoses. They were using genome data in order to do personalized medicine, which really allowed for targeted approaches to treatments and was improving outcomes radically. I thought to myself when I saw some of that work, how interesting it could be if we could take AI into the domain that I cared about, which was protecting those vulnerable populations, to see how much of an impact we could have if we took our best thinking and applied it to that problem area. I'm a firm believer in public-private partnerships. I think especially in things like data science and cybersecurity, it's a very natural fit. And the reason for that is public sector customers have lots of information that they're trying to find the signal and the signal from the noise in. And technology innovators are looking for high quality data sets to be able to test new technology applications on. So I never saw it as a zero-sum game that you had to focus on exactly the optimized P&L, the profit and loss center for the business, because everybody benefits when innovation is happening and there's a good source of data where we can apply it to a real world problem. And so working through that, I learned a lot more about this topic than I knew before. Working with partnerships with established companies across the industry, as well as with signature nonprofits in this field, I was able to fundraise $4 million within the company as an entrepreneur to help the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children accelerate the coordinated national response to children who are being sexually abused online, and get that turnaround time from tech companies to law enforcement down from 30 days to 24 hours in 2017. It was a hard thing to try to think about going back to just selling technology for technology's sake. And so it was my catalyst for exploring entrepreneurship as an option for my career. Being deep in the data, one of the things that I learned from the National Center was that 40% of child pornography that's generated is actually generated by children themselves. And that took me back to way back in the day when we were forecasting the cellular market, thinking about phones having color displays and cameras. And it really resonated with me, that aha moment of, this has been a societal problem for a very long time. There's always been predators out there, but they never had ubiquitous access to so many people in such an easy way to do it. And so I really wanted to put focus on helping the good guys, the people on the front lines trying to find those kids behind cameras that need rescue, to have just as good a tools as the nefarious actors that were hurting them. And so we worked in partnership across the industry to help build those better tools. And during that process, we wanted to get ahead of the problem. I didn't want to be in the trauma cleanup business anymore. It's just too sad. I wanted to be in the trauma prevention business. And my friend from Apple had been listening to some of my work for a while. We had kids that went to preschool together. And he approached me one day and just said, "Hey, I'm not under NDA anymore. The iPhone 10 launched. We have AI accelerator chips on camera now for facial recognition. And I think we can do more to stop this problem before it ever gets started." And so that started our naive journey of fundraising for a company. We established our company MinorGuard. We defined our product roadmap to be innovative in determining how to identify that a phone is being used by a child. And then in addition to that, to have an AI intervention for nudity scanning on the chip in the camera. As we got clear on what we thought our vision was, we looked to build up a market, and we're partnering with K-12 education. And the reason we focused there was because we knew ground truth on kids' ages. Because what we learned was the technology just really wasn't there in 2017 to be able to exactly tell if somebody is 16 or 19 or even 13 or 14 sometimes. And so we wanted to make the simplest solution we possibly could. In our research, we found some innovative ways to do that, and we tested those out in the market. Eventually, Apple came back to us and shared with us that we were building potentially competing product to something they may make in the future. And we had to make a big decision point. Did we want to focus on making $1 million, or did we want to focus on saving 1 million children from trauma? It was an easy answer. We never went into this with anything but an impact in mind. And so I'm really proud to share with you now that in the iPhone 12, it has gone from 130 different decisions that you had to make to prevent your child or somebody under 18 from being able to create and distribute their own child pornography. A 30-second decision may be fueled on by a really cute person in their class that they're just so excited they're getting from attention from, that can haunt them for the rest of their lives. And it is now a single button on iOS. And I just want to share with you, as you're exploring your career in tech, it's incredibly important to figure out what your why is. What's your through line, the thing you've always been passionate about? When I look back in my history, I had my day job, I had my engineering background, but really, where did I spend my time and my nights and weekends? I volunteered at the shelter teaching computer skills to homeless women so that they could have fair access to employment and the dignity of a paycheck. I worked on reading interventions for low-income youth before having my own kids for 10 years with the United Way. I've always been really focused on how do we remove roadblocks for people that have the talent, have the passion, and have the drive to have them let them have fulfilling lives and have the dignity of being the change in their own communities. And I don't want you all to go follow what I did. Frankly, there were some rocks along the way that were pretty difficult to overcome. But I want you to follow your own path. I think you're at a unique place in our society right now and in the evolving work structure to be able to make your own impact, whether that be your passion about animals or seniors or the environment or lifting other women, or choose your own adventure. But think about how can you be that visionary with your lived life experience that maybe sees the same problem just a little bit differently, because you can see how it disproportionately affects people like you. And guess what? We're half the population. There is no reason these things have to be solved solely by philanthropy. It really is innovation that will benefit businesses, benefit brands, and help to rate when waters rise, all boats float. So I'm really honored to be here today to share my story with you. So as you're exploring these opportunities to be on the front lines of public and private partnerships, you can make your own unique mark, because it's not enough to just get invited to the table. We need to start changing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Lisa. And the last sentence that you just said, it's not just a seat at the table anymore. It's time for us to take charge. I really, really agree with that, because we have been struggling for a seat at the table for quite a while now, and some of us are at the table. It's time for us to make our mark, and do something that will positively impact our environment, our surrounding, whatever surrounding that is, however you want to define that. And it's so, so important. And
yeah, our social fabric, right? When we can rise, we need to take others with us. It's incredibly important.
yes, it is. And yeah, I couldn't have put it better in better words, because that is so important. Sometimes you see these people that are in powerful positions, they got there through sheer hard work, and then they go ahead, and the next person that they're mentoring, the next person that wants to do what they're doing, they just don't support those people. They're like, I had worked so hard, I went through all this, so you have to go through all this. No, you went through all this so you can teach the next person that comes after you how to overcome that, how to work around that, how to get there. Not quite as difficult path following. So
we all stand on the shoulders of generations that came before us, and the life that I lead and the success that I've had is only possible because of the women that came before me that showed that we could have a seat at the table. And I'm not doing anyone a service if I don't make that an easier journey for the next person, so that when they get their energy, when they get to that table, they still have their energy to move the conversation forward.
true. We'll go ahead and take some questions. The one I had was, you had talked about technology that somehow was a little competing with Apple. Could you tell us a little bit more, or is it a confidential?
Oh, that's okay. Basically what we were doing was building an app that we wanted to put in the App Store. And so as a result of having a review, my co-founder had been at Apple, had taken a 2-month sabbatical, and we were guaranteed that he would have IP protection for what we developed during that time. But when he was ready to go back in after that 2 months, the lawyers, the engineers, and everybody else reviewed what we had built and made that determination. I actually think it's a gift in hindsight. And the reason it was a gift, it didn't feel like a gift at the time, for the record, is because the following year, they really cracked down on child safety apps in the App Store and removed thousands and thousands of them for consideration around privacy breaches. And so I do think we would have had a very uphill battle had we been able to get what we wanted. So I guess that's the other lesson that I have for you is I really like Dr. Wayne Dyer and his point of view, which is be open to everything and attached to nothing. It's easier said than done, but try to have some faith that the universe is nudging you in the right direction, even when it feels like it's all like coming down the drain.
And I do like the way you just said it did not feel that way at the time, but in the long run, it did pay off because
I got that phone call when I was in Chicago conducting focus group interviews with tween and teen girls and their parents about their experience being sextorted, being humiliated, and building the business case with pediatricians, doctors, and church leaders to say this can't be status quo. So to hear that you've given up everything to go do this, and you have to sit with the discomfort of not knowing if it will get solved, that was a terrible position to be in. But I knew that if a company decided to do this in their own regard and it came from the inside out, it would actually deploy in the real world. And so we made the decision to make that trade-off. And I was able to salvage some of the things that we had done in our roadmap for the Android market, have an exit into a larger competitor in this space that could integrate our solutions. They took some of our product roadmap visions and partnered with Lenovo, and now there is nudity blocking and quarantining and Chromebooks across many, many schools. And I'm really proud of that work. And with my co-founder going back inside, I'm not saying that he built the technology, but at the end of the day, we prototyped it, we set the vision, and all of a sudden, a few years later, it's distributed. And the payoff for me at the end of the day, he got a nice kicker. He got a very, very large retention bonus for going back.
wow.
But the benefit for me is that now that my elementary school age children are getting to the stage where I can't fight the phone battle much longer on delay, I now have something I can purchase in the market that I can feel confident that they won't have it weaponized against them by somebody who's manipulating them.
Yeah, that is excellent. I mean, for such a big company to, because they took a step forward in the right direction in preventing this kind of things and removing so many apps from the app store, for them to come to a similar decision, to a similar idea that they wanted to confront this issue head on and try whatever in power they had to do this. It's just, it shows that tech just for the sake of developing tech is not enough anymore. There has to be some kind of a bigger perspective, a bigger end game. It's just not enough.
Yeah, and I mean, the skills I learned being an entrepreneur, I mean, I was a skilled person. I was a director of a $6 billion P&L at that point in time. I had a very comfortable cash flow position and vacation and stock and all the trappings. And I was convinced that this step off the ledge was going to lead me to be a bag lady. That was exactly what I was planning for. I tracked my spending for 3 months. Like, can we live on my husband's income? Are my kids going to be able to do dance class? Like, what does this mean if I live in alignment with my integrity? And what's amazing about it to this day, to me, it never ceases to surprise me, is I've done better financially every year since then. It's a little bit more haphazard. I do a few more things. But the street MBA I got setting up a company, talking with lawyers about SEC filings for accepting funding from angel investors, and working on burn rates to determine how long that funding will last with financial P&L spreadsheets, and being able to justify that we have enough runway to get this off the ground, and leading a virtual team globally to align against a common vision, setting the culture, setting the tone. I mean, in one day you get promoted from being, an employee of a company to head of IT, head of legal, head of HR, head janitor. And oh yeah, by the way, you have to go build some technology too. And there, you learn a lot when you have to. And you also learn to be much more forgiving with yourself about being a perfectionist or feeling like you have to do everything right. You realize how many leaders are just like, we'll wing it, throw it against the wall, see if it sticks. And why not you? Why are they any more qualified? And I think that is an incredibly valuable lesson to move forward with. And I think also the other lesson that I move forward with is, when I'm in alignment with my values and my integrity, my power to impact is exponential. And when I am sitting with the discomfort of knowing that I'm not doing as much as I could, the energy just drops. So it's really important to get quiet with yourself periodically, check in on how you are feeling, and make sure that you're focusing on your own definition of success, not one that's been handed down to you. The world is not what it was when your parents were making their way up the chain. It's not what it was when mine were. And I think we're at a unique opportunity post-pandemic with the she-cession that we are all reading about and the disproportionate impact it's had on women, to be much more entrepreneurial, to be much more scrappy, and stop waiting for somebody to anoint us to have a point of view and drive change. We can appoint ourselves. And there's a lot of room to help move this industry along by bringing innovation to bear in the real world and showing the big players how it's done.
Yeah, I agree with that. So you had started your company, right? Could you tell us the name of the company again?
Sure. The company that we ran for 2018 was called Minor Guard. And we exited that company. I went into Bark Technologies, and my co-founder went back to Apple. I now run my own consultancy called AMP Solutions, where I do advising for multiple startups in the high-tech space. And then I have a day job where I consult for large tech companies and healthcare systems, helping them to implement artificial intelligence into solutions in the real world.
Okay, very cool. So when you were working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and it can't have been an easy thing to do. Like, what was the hardest part for you?
The hardest part for me was probably the age that my children were at when I was having the veil lifted of some of the darker corners of the internet. Because they lived with me. I could see how vulnerable they were. I could see how much energy and love I put into them for them to thrive, and to think that not all children are born into functional families that can protect them. To think about that there are oftentimes your child is safer going down to the park by themselves, which most people would never let their kids do, than they are in their room on their phone. You know, the first meeting I had at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I had a chance to sit down with their CEO. He was relatively new. He had just come over from Lockheed Martin, being the CTO there. And prior to that, he was the director of the Federal Marshals Service. For those of you that don't know, the marshals are the people that go track down all the non-compliant felons, including sex offenders. So he really had a good sense of what the real problems were out there in the world. And for those of you that might think this is a small problem, in 2020, there were 65 million images of the worst day of a child's life circulated to reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This is not a small problem. When we started, there were 500,000 reports in 2013, and by 2019, there were 6 million reports. And by 2020, we had 65 million images and videos. So not every report is just one image or video, so you understand the scaling. But the growth of this problem statement is exponential. And it's because it's often like kind of an in the shadows kind of thing, right? Like if you have a drug problem, if you have an alcohol problem, if you have any other kind of addiction, oftentimes it shows up in your life in other places, and people kind of know something's off. If you have a problem with this, nobody knows. It's your secret, and you're blending in with society. And so I think it's really dangerous when these difficult things are getting circulated, because a lot of times it's people that are normal people that maybe start getting into some adult content online and get bored with it and start drifting further and further away from what's societally acceptable. And just like heroin, I don't have a problem with this content. I've never been featured in this content. I haven't been trafficked, but I have been exposed to many, many victims and had to hear their stories. And I have gotten PTSD from vicarious trauma of what they've endured. And it just makes me so sad on all fronts that some of the worst content on the dark web has moved into the general websites via social media. And because of laws like Section 230 that really remove any responsibility across the industry for monitoring beyond, a cursory level, it can scale, and bad ideas are spreading. And there's always been bad ideas and there's always been bad people, but I think the contagion is different. It's almost like this pandemic, right? Like, we always knew we could get sick, but it's especially dangerous now in a different way. And I hope that when we get out of this political rhetoric about, our social media companies censoring political points of view, that we get down to brass tacks. What are we doing to protect children in this country online? What responsibility are we putting on the systems, the government, and society to stop the spread of trauma? We have protections in the real world all day for kids. It's time to have them online.
It is high time. 65 million. That's
it's not a rounding error.
that's not a no, that's not a small number.
It's not. And we can do better. And I think we will do better. But I think it's on all of us to be demanding more from the companies with services that we use.
Yeah.
And it's also on us to demand more of ourselves, to not support the way that they make money, which is engagement and accounts and all those things, until they commit to doing so.
Yeah. Like I said, building tech just for the sake of building tech is not enough. And it's just.
Well, to be fair, I mean, the automotive industry didn't have a seatbelt law until the mid 80s, right? You have to have enough traffic on the road, have enough fatalities to justify having to have a more proactive safety stance.
Yeah.
And I actually think that the first 20 years of the internet probably did need to be a little bit of the Wild West in order for people to really rise and thrive.
Yeah.
But we're now at a place where the harm is outweighing the benefit in some specific areas. And we need to start thinking about, how do we manage the impact of that?
Yeah.
And I think that there are many ways that can be handled, but I think it's going to have to lead with policy. I think we need governments to step in and set a level playing field for everybody to work within.
Yeah. So, what would you like your lasting impact to be?
I want one of these times that I give a talk to take one person that had a really good, ambitious idea, but didn't have the confidence that they could pull it off, to do the behaviors that they can pull it off before the feelings came, and launch something that changes the world. That's what
I love that. And
I'm getting too old and weary to do it myself anymore.
I love that. It's and what you'd said, because there are so many wonderful and smart ideas, but they just lack the confidence to come forward and see it through. Because it could be, oh my God, what if I fail? How am I gonna do this? How am I gonna do that? What do I have a fallback option in case it doesn't work out? Those are the questions that always pull us back.
I always thought that the challenge of running a company was having a great idea. And what I learned through this process is there are a ton of great ideas. It all lands in execution. It lands in listening to your customers. And if you built what you set out to build and you didn't have any customer changing your mind about tweaking it to something more effective, you already failed. It's about building the most crappy thing you're embarrassed about, getting it out in the wild, getting everybody to tell you what they really want, building that with excellence, doing what you say and saying and actually following through on it is surprisingly a dying art.
It's
I can't really process that growing up working in auto factories in Detroit. Like, all you have is your word. Like, that's how I came up, but it's a dying art. And I think that I never have seen anybody be more committed to following through on what they said they're going to do than a group of technical women. We do that like in our sleep.
Yeah,
We wouldn't be here if we didn't do everything we said we're going to do.
No, it's just the way we are, because we want to prove ourselves. We want to show the world, hey, I said I'm going to do this. I am going to do this. You need to see that I'm capable. You need to see that I'm talented. And I just feel that's why what you just said makes a lot of sense.
And that's my message to all of you now. Do everything you're doing right now to prove that you earn a seat at the table. But what gets you there, what got you there will not get you where you need to go. And that is, once you've earned that respect and that seat at the table, start to manifest your unique voice. Take your skills and make it something that is legacy building. Because that's what's going to ultimately restitch our societal fabric. That's ultimately what's going to be bringing more justice to bear for people that have never had access to that. That's going to be what helps to balance some of our challenges in the environment. That's what's going to be what challenges our humanity and the distribution of medical care. We need people that have lived experiences outside of privilege to bring reality to bear in the rooms where the products are being designed, where the policies are being made, and where the rubber hits the road on innovation and entrepreneurship. And with those three things lined up, I have full faith that this next generation is going to move us societally so much further forward that it's going to be a place I want to raise my grandkids in.
Awesome. I was actually gonna wrap up the Q&A with what advice would you give, but you just did. So, and we are out of time. So I am going to launch a quick poll to see our attendance. I've never launched a poll, so oh, there it is. So just a quick little poll, if you could all take it, I would really appreciate it. We just like to collect some statistics to see what your interest in cyber conversations is. And Lisa, thank you so much for being on our conversations today. It was a pleasure to have you here. And anybody who has watch conversations before, we have this every Wednesday, so please come back again. Next Wednesday we have Monica Verma. She is the founder of Monica Talks CybHER. She's going to be on next Wednesday. And for anybody else, if you want to rewatch any conversation ever that was recorded in the last 1 year, everything's on our YouTube channel. And please subscribe and follow us on our social media. And Lisa, thank you so much.
And I would love to share with your listeners, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn if you want to follow what I'm doing and stay active there. Or you can also go to my website, lisathie.com, to see how you can get more involved in the work that I'm doing.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much. Come back again next week. Have a great evening.